Hi, I'm Ilyse Hogue, and I read regular column at The Nation. Thanks for having me on the show today. My point is that what if we've reached a critical mass with Citizens United that has actually started to swing the pendulum the other way? Let's consider two separate sides of the equation. For progressive movements who had become increasingly reliant on paid media strategies, we've seen a reversion to old school organizing tactics mixed with new savvy netroots strategies that have allowed us significant victories since the beginning of the year. SOPA and PIPA, the Wisconsin recall, and the Keystone Pipeline were all made possible not from paid advertising, but from people actually getting together, brainstorming interesting things to do, and creating new alliances. On the flip side, we're seeing super PACs with unlimited dollars actually start to cancel each other out. They bought all the available airtime in South Carolina. Hundreds of millions of dollars will go into this election. While less and less people are watching TV, we're seeing a rise of people power and a questionable impact of an oversaturation of paid advertising on the way people think. And I think the formula together for that is that Citizens United actually may have united the citizens, all for the good of democracy. Thanks for having me on. You can check me out at my blog at thenation.com.
Manju, do we have an ironic twist here that Citizens United might have galvanized the progressive movement and plus cancel each other out, I guess, with Gingrich and Romney destroying each other?
Right. I think Ilyse makes a really good point, because I think if you look at on the state level with the Wisconsin recall and in Ohio in terms of overturning the anti-union legislation, we've had some really significant victories. And then on the national front with Keystone and then the birth control efforts that were successful just last week. And what I see here really, though, is voters being frustrated by what's going on, seeing the domination of money, and really just exploring the old tools. And at the South Asian Network, I mean, that's, grassroots organizing is really one of our fundamental strategies as we try to advance the health, solidarity, and empowerment of South Asian Americans in Southern California. And we've been, I mean, really, when you want to talk about movement building, which is more than just electoral politics, you're talking about raising awareness, you're talking about active involvement of your citizenry. And then you're talking about policy advocacy. And essentially what I think this has done is, as you said, galvanized folks to say, look, this is not just going to be, we're not going to allow it to be about money anymore. Right. But I do think that the Democratic Party has been about money and about corporate money for a long time. And so what we need to have happen is what happens, David Frum said about Republicans, they fear their base and Democrats loathe their base. We, on the progressive side, need them to fear us so that they do the right thing. And that's exactly what happened just with the birth control issue, which is that President Obama, against the Catholic Church, came out in favor of requiring all health plans to cover, as part of preventive health care, birth control. Right.
Look, on the fearing your base, I couldn't agree more. People that drive me crazy are like, no, support Obama. If you clap louder, he'll do what we want, which has not been the case so far. But, Robin, I'm both incredibly hopeful and deeply cynical at the same time on this issue. I think that if we galvanize everybody on what we were talking about before, fighting Citizens United, Ilyse is referring to, whether it's the amendment, campaign finance reform, I think it can definitely work. But, we delay Keystone. If a Republican wins, no question it gets approved. If Obama wins, I think they're going to approve it anyway, right?
He's already invited TransCanada to resubmit a new route that just goes around an aquifer to. Personally, I'll bet anybody here $5 that if Obama gets reelected.
Not 10,000.
Not 10,000, $5. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so Robin, what's your sense? Can we win with grassroots movements? Are they real victories? Or do we need to do something else?
Well, we don't have a choice. You have to win with grassroots organizing. There's no other alternative. Money in media doesn't win campaigns, elections, or make things stop. Sometimes it means civil disobedience. Sometimes it means, electoral politics. But it's the only choice we have. And I think we have to be reminded always that part of the upsurge that led to Wisconsin, Occupy, the sort of U.S. spring, if you will, had much to do with previous organizing. In other words, there was a U.S. Social Forum. There was a lot of organizations already out there. There was all these movements. Domestic Workers United, for example, had a great victory in New York, and we'll have one in California, getting a domestic workers' bill of rights. There's Walmart stores that are being attempting to have a place in inner city communities that are being opposed. And I think that kind of mobilization at the grassroots always succeeds. Will there be defeats? Of course there will be defeats. Will Keystone come? Probably. But there's so many fronts to fight on. And I think that there's no choice, there's no alternative but mass mobilization and methods of organizing that are really kind of old-fashioned.
Patrick, do we have to pull in right-wingers here in order to win? Because whether it's a constitutional amendment, you need 3/4 of the states to do that, or when we defeated, for the moment being, SOPA and PIPA, conservatives are also on our side. Auditing the Fed, conservatives are also on our side.
Right.
And if we need them, how do we pull them in?
I don't know, but we got to. That is the only way. And you know, when I was sort of spending some time at the Occupy encampment, which was not a lot of time, it was a couple nights, but you know, I remember occasionally engaging with people, and you know, and different issues would come up that maybe were away from the issue of sort of recapturing, you know, our democratic republic, right? And in almost every case, I sort of thought, well, listen, that's going to be for the people to decide. You know, oh, should we ban chemtrails? Well, let's decide that. But, you know, the people need to sort of like recapture our own democracy, you know, and so conservatives, I think, need to know that, you know, for any sort of fundamental change to be undergone, that you know, that will allow us to sort of like, you know, put our own hands back on the republic that we're supposed to own, that some of the subsequent victories may end up being theirs, and that we as Americans have to say, well, you know, listen, as long as, you know, our fundamental rights aren't being violated, like, you know, okay, conservatives, like, you've won this one, but, you know, at this point, yeah, it's going to require that. You know, the progressive base of America is not nearly large enough to create that sort of fundamental change.
You know, so then at least a couple of ironic victories on the Republican primary side, right? One, Ron Paul is galvanizing conservatives, libertarians on this actual civil liberties issue that we totally agree on. Yeah. And second of all, Manju, they're ripping each other apart. They're the guys who are the bad guys, Romney and Gingrich.
Right, and when you're talking about what's happening in the Republican Party, I mean, the one way in which money has not been as influential as it could be is the fact that Rick Perry dropped out of the race, and that Newt Gingrich is actually doing quite well for the limited resources that he has. I actually think that we're not going to be able to form a coalition of progressives and conservatives on this unless, by some miracle, Obama and the Democrats raise so much money that the Republicans have to claim poverty, as they did even last time, right?
Yeah.
You hear them talking about it over and over again.
That would be another ironic thing.
Right. That they're already saying, oh, he's going to raise $1 billion. And if he does that with the Democrats and then they win the presidency in both houses, you may see that. But I think anything short of that, you're not going to see it. And I just want to make one other point, which I'm not sure that the SOPA and PIPA thing actually has to not do with money. I think it does, absolutely.
No
because
the internet companies are gigantic, and they're pouring in money by the truckloads.
Right.
In fact, Patrick Leahy basically admitted this is like his Job Creation Act for lobbyists, because they're all coming in. Because Hollywood had already bought them, but the internet companies had not bought them sufficiently.
Right.
So
Silicon Valley, nowadays, really does contribute almost as much as Hollywood itself does. So, you know, I wish it were the case that, like, hey, the little guys stood up and the big guys went away running. Well, it's like the little guys stood up, but, you know, the little guys have stood up before. The Electronic Freedom Foundation, like, writes lots of model legislation that may as well just, like, throw it right down a toilet. But if you get Google and you get Yahoo, you know, on your side, like, suddenly they're listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that ties all this together is these ironic victories. So, Robin, I mean, as you look at this, I think, you know, it's a point I hadn't heard before, Manju, and it's a really good one, that if Obama comes in with a crushing amount of money, if Newt Gingrich comes in and says, beats Mitt Romney, and the Republican establishment gets pissed, and he did it just on the one donor, Sheldon Adelson, and then they say, wait a minute now, other Republicans might say, I don't like this one guy deciding the election, right? And then they run into the Obama machine, and Obama crushes them with money. Maybe, because the only way you get anything done in this country, it seems like, is if Republicans do it, right? I mean, it's sad, but it's true. Maybe if you put all those events together, maybe we get dead Republicans go, you know what, let's get the goddamn money out.
But that proceeds from the assumption that Newt Gingrich and that Mitt Romney call the shots in the Republican Party. And I personally don't believe that they do. The people who call the shots in the Republican Party are the people behind Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich writing the checks. And they're okay with one guy swinging the election. Yeah. And as long as they are okay with that, I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah, we could say something similar about the Democratic Party, because we're talking about big money.
Yeah.
And my fear, I suppose, in answering your question, is whether or not Democrats would then support campaign finance if their man is winning. In other words, if their people are winning, maybe it's not an issue. But I think it's an ethical issue. It's a constitutional issue, I think. It's a democratic issue. And I think it has to be talked about that way, as the denial of democracy and full participation.
Yeah, and look, that's why it's my final point on this is that it's very important for progressives to understand that when Democrats win, progressives don't necessarily win. So you have to insist that they do things that are progressive, because otherwise they'll just keep taking the money and call it big Democratic victories, and we go, so what, if it didn't get us the progressive ideals that we hope for.